Welcome to Biocanic's Health Intelligence Exchange community, where leading practitioners in integrative health approaches will discuss how they solve the most challenging and common health issues. These regular Q&A discussions are designed to take a deep dive into case studies and integrative approaches in order to elevate the collective knowledge of both experienced and new practitioners alike. Biocanic's Health Intelligence Exchange, your community for functional medicine.
Welcome to the Health Intelligence Exchange, everyone. Make sure you subscribe wherever you are watching or listening so you never miss an episode. And for those of you joining live today, we are going to transition to a live Q&A toward the end of this presentation, so feel free to start posting your questions in the comments below. I'm Lainey Gray, Strategic Accounts Manager for Biocanic, and I'm joined today by our guest, Cathy Eason from Berkeley Life. Hi, Cathy.
Hi, Lainey. Nice to be here.
So glad to have you. Today, we are going to be discussing reclaiming flow, how nitric oxide shapes women's health in perimenopause. Our guest, Cathy Eason, is the Chief Science Officer and Clinical Education Director at Berkeley Life, where she leads practitioner training and educational content on the science and clinical application of nitric oxide. With a passion for teaching and collaboration, Cathy brings decades of experience in functional medicine, patient education, and provides mentorship to help practitioners integrate nitric oxide insights into everyday care. Through her continued work with Open Door Healing, she also offers consulting, professional development, and holistic health education for both individuals and healthcare teams. All right, let's jump right in. Cathy, can you share a bit about your background and what led you to focus on nitric oxide research and education?
I can, and thank you again for having me today. It's so funny to hear you say, decades of a career, which is true, though. I have been at this for decades. And I'm proud of that now. There's a time in your life where you just accept how old you are and move forward with all this knowledge and wisdom that you've gathered along the way. So happy to share that I have been a functional nutritionist for over 20 years. I taught nutritional therapy practitioner trainings for about 15 years. I have worked with, I've had a private practice. I've worked in clinics. I've done a lot of education through practitioner mentorship. And how I actually got to really study nitric oxide is, you learn things early in your training, early in your educational degree. And you're like, yeah, that seems important, but they're not shiny enough and they're not flashy enough. And so they tend to kind of just, fall off your shoulder and you know them, but you don't really think about them. Well, fast forward to working with some clients using the Berkeley Life product for about 6 years before I came to work for Berkeley Life. And it was one day I talked to a patient on the phone, is a virtual patient. I sent an order of Berkeley Life Nitric Oxide Foundation to this patient. And the very next day, somebody from Berkeley Life called me and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about joining a team like ours?" And here I am. I'm now with the company a little over 18 months and studying everything that nitric oxide does and recognizing how silly I was that I wasn't using the product with pretty much every single patient I work with. And even sillier that I wasn't taking it on a daily basis myself until I started working for the company. So I was recommending it, but I wasn't using it myself. And now as a midlife woman, I'm like, I should have been using this all along. So that's sort of my short story about how I got here.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing. Can you tell us what the core mission of Berkeley Life is and how does it tie into functional and integrative health?
Yeah, this is where the simplicity and the foundation really comes to light. Most of us here are some kind of root cause practitioner, right? We're always seeking what happened before that and what's the underlying cause. There is nothing more underlying and promoting of health than your blood flow. And Berkeley Life's mission is to educate the masses on the importance of blood flow, understanding what it does for us, how it fuels every system and organ in the body, how it impairs us when blood flow is restricted, and beyond just the normal things we think about like cardiovascular dysfunction. But really, there's not a system in the body that doesn't benefit from improved blood flow. And behind improved blood flow is the signaling mechanism of nitric oxide. It's not flashy. It's a 2-atom molecule that your body makes, and we also can augment dietarily. And that's where, as a nutritionist, I went, there has got to be something missing to help my patients reach those healing plateaus a little faster. For me, it's been nitric oxide, and now I'm empowered to educate all the practitioners out here about the value of this important molecule in the body, and ways beyond diet that we can also boost it in the body.
Okay, that's amazing. I love that you just said blood flow, right? We take it for granted, kind of like breathing, right? And we're just like, oh, what can we do? We can do all of these really intense protocols, but if we're not breathing or our blood doesn't flow to all of our tissues, we're going to have dysfunction or not be functioning optimally. Thank you for clarifying that, because I think we sometimes overlooked how simple some of these things can be. So now that we've talked about blood flow and nitric oxide a little, what is nitric oxide and why is it such a critical yet often overlooked molecule in clinical practice?
So nitric oxide is a 2-atom molecule made of nitrogen and oxygen. And it was originally discovered earlier in the 1900s. It was well studied in the 1970s. And then by the late 1990s, there was a team of pharmacologists who won a Nobel Prize in medicine and physiology for the discovery of nitric oxide as a signaling molecule for the cardiovascular system, signaling the relaxation of smooth muscle cells, especially those of the blood vessels, to vasodilate, open and widen our blood vessels and improve blood flow. And you can imagine the implications that had in medicine for treating high blood pressure, for treating blood clots, for treating all sorts of vascular related diseases, neuropathies and things like that. And back then it was coined the miracle molecule. Now we know a little bit more about the molecule, and now we're starting to call it the longevity molecule, the vitality molecule, because not only is it signaling vasodilation and improved blood flow, which then has the secondary effects of carrying nutrition and oxygen to the cells, every cell in the body, more effectively. But we also know that there are dozens of other signaling mechanisms of nitric oxide used in localized tissues, used in hormone responses, inflammatory immune responses, gut responses, including good digestion and gut healing need. And so there's literally not a system in the body that this tiny little molecule, nitric oxide, which is a gas, has a half-life of a few milliseconds to maybe a couple seconds in the bloodstream. So it's a very short-acting molecule. And it's a molecule that, let's call it the Goldilocks molecule too, because it has both properties of a reductive agent and an oxidative agent, meaning it can kind of go both ways. So when it's in concentrations that can be oxidizing, it's going to help us as an anti-pathogenic agent. And when it's in a more of a neutral, consistent level in the body, it's going to contribute to the signaling of blood flow and all the other things that I lightly touched on there. So it's really powerful. And again, I don't think it's sexy enough in functional medicine, and that's why it doesn't really get its due, because it is the foundation of all health systems to improve blood flow, to bring that nutrition, to bring oxygenation, to carry wastes away. That is what keeps our tissues healthy, vibrant, regenerative. And because it's a gas and we can't see it and we can't measure it daily in terms of gas molecule numbers, then we don't think about it as much. And most people don't feel their blood flow. We often don't really think about how many times we respirate in a minute. We don't think about how fast our heart is beating unless we measure it. So this is another one of those objectives that we will measure in context, but we can't get a grasp on it in the moment. So I think practitioners don't think about it.
Thank you. That's brilliant. That's a brilliant explanation. And going back to just that foundational piece of how that improves blood flow, which then leads to every other area of the body and system, and how it can be improved by having better nitric oxide levels. So today we're going to talk a little more specifically about what does nitric oxide do in the body for women's health. Can you expand on that one?
Oh gosh, I think we're not going to have time to touch on every single property, but Berkeley Life, this is one of the areas that we're also proud to be focusing on. One of our missions is to contribute to the research that is lagging in women's health issues. And so we are trying to be on the forefront of that research. We have a scientific advisory board that I have the extreme pleasure to work with. Some of the smartest, most brilliant researchers across the world are doing clinical trials that we contribute to because we want to learn more, and especially when it comes to women's health. So let's think about what the women that you and I talk to on the daily, what do they complain to us about? They complain about their energy levels and their fatigue. They complain about they're getting midlife and maybe they have a little bit more weight on their body than they used to, and they're feeling, uncomfortable with that. They, we tend to call it cortisol belly, and we tend to, blame it on our gut dysfunction because we ate birthday cake at the party the other day, that kind of thing. Women are learning a lot more about their hormones and their hormone balancing. Women are learning more about how to stay healthy and vibrant and have the vigor they had when they were younger so that they can keep up with the kids. They can, work a full day, make dinner, and still go to the park, all the things that women especially want to focus on. So we are focusing on women's health right now in our, sort of our promotional efforts, but also in our study efforts. And so I think let's just take energy. One thing we know about nitric oxide is that nitric oxide is a signaling mechanism for the mitochondria. And in the presence of oxygen, which when you have opened up blood vessels, better blood flow, you're getting better delivery of oxygen to the cells and to the mitochondria. We're going to get greater efficiency of ATP production out of the mitochondria because of the boosted nitric oxide. I can't tell you how many times I go to a conference, a show, a public event, and women will take a dose of Berkeley Life nitric oxide support, and they'll come back an hour later and go, is it possible I'm feeling more energy? And it is possible because if I happen to forget a dose one day, I feel it. And I automatically reach for my dietary nitrate support because I know I want that energy feeling and I want that sort of stamina and actually also mental stamina, sort of mental acuity throughout the day. So we know that mechanistically nitric oxide signals mitochondrial biogenesis, or the regeneration of healthy mitochondria built from less healthy mitochondria. So we take two unhealthy ones, we recycle the bad parts, we put two new ones together, and boom, we've got a brand new created mitochondria that is there to be more efficient at energy production. So I think for women, especially wanting, to pop out of bed and feel ready for the day and not dread it, even if there's some stress, we want that energy feeling. Secondly, I mentioned the weight and the weight gain and the weight imbalance, if you will. There's lots, we know all the blood sugar regulation reasons, we know hormonal imbalances, and behind all that, there are some mechanistic things that nitric oxide does to support our digestion, our gut health, and our hormone control. So we know that nitric oxide signals gastric motility. So you think about it, you've got smooth muscle cells all throughout your digestive tract, and it's important for the stomach and the small intestine and the large intestine to be able to relax and contract its smooth musculature for dietary assimilation and waste removal. So we know that by boosting NO levels to optimal levels, we're going to have better gastric motility. We also know that nitric oxide signals your GLUT4 receptors to come to the surface of the cell and more efficiently bring glucose into the cell, so we get better glucose response. We know that nitric oxide signals better insulin sensitivity, so now we're seeing that metabolism piece too, where we can better utilize the foods that we are eating. And one of the beyond energy, another thing women tell me is that after a couple weeks of nitric oxide support, they feel like their belly's flattening a little bit and they haven't done anything different. I can tell you what else is happening there is that they're calming their stress response because nitric oxide plays a role in regulating the stress hormones, your epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol. And we know it plays a role as a reverse, a retro neurotransmitter, helping us better send and receive those neurotransmitter signals that calm the stress response. I just heard a testimonial yesterday. A practitioner wrote into us and said that she had to do a public speaking event, and she always gets super nervous, but she had started taking the NO Foundation 3 days before the event and found that her nervousness was gone. It was the first time in her 15-year career she could stand up and give a talk without feeling, just completely nervous and like she was a wreck. And then just to continue on this, what else does nitric oxide do for women? Well, we know that it plays a role in hormone regulation as well, too. So just like it's playing a role in regulating the neurotransmitters that calm our stress response, it has an activity on the anterior pituitary, helping regulate the release and the utilization of all our corticosteroids. So that's your estrogens and testosterones and cortisol. And so we know that there's, it's not the only fix, but it is part of the regulatory mechanism to keep our hormonal release and utilization more balanced. And then here's one big picture that I want all practitioners to get today, because this is the big one that Berkeley Life has dedicated our education toward, is that women need to know, and especially women midlife. Now, what is midlife? Midlife depends on each person, right? But I think we all want longevity with a great health span. We want to live vibrantly into our older years. So I want to encourage younger women to do this too. But we know that there is a direct relationship between estrogen levels and nitric oxide levels. And where we produce nitric oxide in the body endogenously is in the endothelial tissue. We have endothelial nitric oxide synthase enzymes. This is the primary place of nitric oxide production in the body. And that activity starts when we're born, starts probably before we're born, but we start to see a decline in that enzyme function really starting in about our 20s. And as we are exposed to greater and greater levels of oxidative stress in this world, we see younger and younger people with evidence of oxidative stress that is degrading the quality of the endothelial tissue and causing nitric oxide level or production to decline. Where estrogen comes in is that when a woman starts to enter perimenopause and menopause and her estrogen levels drop, we know that estrogen signals the production, it signals the eNOS enzymes in the endothelial tissue to produce nitric oxide. As estrogen declines, there are less activated estrogen alpha and beta receptors. This is where the enzymes for nitric oxide function. There's less gene expression of the enzymes, and nitric oxide plummets at the same time. Now women are at greater risk of vasodilation issues. They are at greater risk of buildup of plaques, platelets, accumulated immune cells in the blood vessels, and it starts to become a cardiovascular disease risk factor because we have depleted NO. And it's estimated in most of the studies I read that by the time both men and women are age 40 years old, we've lost 50% of our capacity to produce nitric oxide, making it even more important that we bridge the gap dietarily along the secondary pathway to producing nitric oxide, and that's through the ingestion of dietary nitrates.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I work with midlife women, and we're always talking about the decline of hormones. And so I love that you just kind of broke that down, because one of the things I will often say is, as our estrogen declines, our risk for cardiovascular disease goes up.
Yes.
So can you kind of go through that again and tie in how the estrogen plays a role in the nitric oxide, therefore, right? Because we're always thinking estrogen only, but estrogen plays a role in that nitric oxide production.
Yeah, it's sort of getting back to that, what happened before that, and what happened before that, and what happened before that. So we know that estrogen has a cardioprotective effect on our vasculature.
Right.
We know that it helps maintain the integrity of that endothelial cell layer, where it's important that there's great oxygen exchange, and that it's important that we get the right exchange of nutrients, or should I say molecules, like nitric oxide, to vasodilate and keep blood flow going. As women age, and they, so what is the why behind that estrogen being cardioprotective? Well, the why is because estrogen signaling of estrogen hormone receptors in the endothelial tissue activates eNOS, endothelial nitric oxide synthase to increase nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide production then is there as nitric oxide is there now in the endothelial tissue as an antioxidant. It's going to help us neutralize free radicals. It's going to help restore the integrity of the endothelial tissue. It's also signaling smooth muscle relaxation, so we get better vasodilation and better blood flow. And with better blood flow comes, more normalized and maintained normalized blood pressure. And I think one of the things that, cardiovascular disease is still a number one cause of death for women in the United States, but also globally. And it's a silent disease for most women. We all know a woman who's had some kind of cardiac event, or maybe a stroke, or a heart attack or something like that. But oftentimes the symptoms are so subtle or so ignored that it comes upon and you're like, oh gosh, she was so healthy. I don't know how she had a heart attack. Well, this is partly what's happening with the estrogen decline. We're seeing this dramatic drop in nitric oxide production. And now we're not getting the vasodilatory effect, and we're not getting the immune effect and the anti-inflammatory effect and the hormonal effect of nitric oxide. And so we see this cascade of symptoms that build. And one of the first things women notice is they're 45 years old and they go to the doctor, and suddenly they have high blood pressure that's never been detected before. Now the standard of medical care is to see this woman with high blood pressure and give her a high blood pressure medication and a statin drug to control her cholesterol levels. And guess what? Nitric oxide in the landmark study that Berkeley Life contributed to on hypertension, we found that some of those inflammatory markers, like low density lipoprotein cholesterol, were reduced with increased intake of dietary nitrates over time. And so we know there's a cause and effect at keeping inflammation down, not just the cholesterol markers, but also C-reactive protein and homocysteine. We saw those come down with 12 weeks or more use of dietary nitrates that are, again, bridging the gap between what we're not making anymore endogenously, what we're not eating dietarily, and because we're so susceptible to oxidative stress in the world.
Wow. Okay. So you alluded to the fact that we sometimes lose up to 50% of that capacity by the time we're in our 40s.
Yes.
That's crazy. Now, is that a sudden thing, or is it kind of a gradual kind of shifting thing? Like as we're aging and things are shifting and all of a sudden we're like good one day and then gradually getting low, or does it just kind of drop off quickly?
It's gradual over time. I think if this were, a flashier molecule, we'd start looking at this in individuals when they're 20, but we don't even check, inflammatory blood markers in most 20-year-olds. So what we can expect is, there is an age-related natural decline in the enzymes that produce nitric oxide. So that progression is probably starting much earlier than we think. Couple that with, let's just look at our environment today. We have people living indoors and working indoors and not really getting out in nature as much as they were sort of, genetically meant to. We have an increasing number of toxin exposures in our environments. We have less nutrition in the foods that we grow. We have, water quality to be suspicious of, and toxin load there. Stress, just emotional stress, is an oxidative stressor to our endothelial tissue. So in this increasingly stressful world, we have younger and younger individuals, who are eating high sugar drinks and maybe, smoking, vaping, some less than healthy habits or unhealthy habits. And that's adding to the speed at which their nitric oxide production declines. And it's showing up in ways that should alarm everybody. We have couples in their 20s who are failing to conceive because of fertility issues related to the cascade of reasons why, cascade of symptoms that are related to poor nitric oxide production and oxidative stress in general. So when we look at younger and younger populations, like, before we went live, we talked about headaches, and we could talk about, that sort of fertility crisis that's silently growing. And we could talk about the number of younger and younger people that are on hypertensive medication in their 20s. And simply because they don't know, and they go to a physician who says, I'm worried, we should, medically control this for you, maybe as a stopgap measure, but let's look at why we're giving 25-year-olds hypertensive medication. That should not be happening.
Okay. So, we've covered a lot of ground here, and how nitric oxide, right, is related to a lot of things. So is it safe to kind of say it's kind of a big deal for everyone at every age, for every physiological process?
Yeah, it is a big deal. It's a big deal
It
for
is.
women. It's a big
Yeah.
deal for men. Historically, you learn about nitric oxide as part of your exercise science degree, and that was my original degree years ago. You learn about it in sort of terms of your performance aid.
Mhm.
It's going to, help bring more blood flow to the muscles. It's going to help remove waste. You're going to have less lactate buildup and be less sore, and your performance is going to soar as a result. And that's true. And we see that in physical performance. But again, a lot of that research is done on men.
Mhm.
And in the research literature, it's mostly male cycling teams or male running teams. It's always these endurance sports.
Okay.
But, they're not studying the average middle-aged pickleball player.
No.
But I think that those individuals are going to see an increase in a boost in their performance and a boost in their ability to recover just as much as the competitive cyclist is. And then one of the things that Berkeley Life studied last year and continues to study into the next year is female sexual function. There are a lot of research. There's a lot of research done on men and erectile dysfunction, and how boosting blood flow by boosting nitric oxide with dietary nitrates can be really helpful to men with erectile dysfunction. Well, guess what? Women have female sexual organs that also need to be perfused with blood and oxygen and nutrition to function optimally. And some of the other things that midlife women complain of are lack of libido and desire for their partner.
Yep.
They have less lubrication than they used to. The orgasm isn't as exciting as it used to be. And so Berkeley Life took the reins and said, let's do some female sexual function trials with our dietary nitrate product, and found some amazing results. The pilot study was great. And we showed, this is the stuff I get to say that's so fun. 83% of the women had an improved and enhanced orgasm experience. And don't we want that for every person as part of a healthy quality of life? And we found improvements like a 73% improvement in desire and libido, also in lubrication. So after the pilot study, a phase 1 trial was done. And this was an interesting trial because we did include some biometrics that weren't in the first one. So we had the subjects wear an Oura ring, and it measured the 21 biomarkers or something that the Oura ring was picking up. And we found some interesting data related to autonomic nervous system control and improvements in anxiety and irritability, improvements in sleep patterns, at the same time still getting that enhanced orgasm, enhanced libido data. So we're hoping in 2026 to do a phase 2 trial, a little bit longer, a few more subjects, and keep collecting the data. And then the other thing we're super excited about for 2026 is we are doing a menopausal women's trial. So these are going to be women after the age of 40 who are identified as menopausal. It will include some perimenopausal women. And we are super excited to see the research that comes out with that and help contribute to the conversation. Mm-hmm. And let's normalize talking about sexual function and menopause and ways that women can feel more vital as they age. And so we're excited to be part of that research.
Okay, that's really exciting. And thank you for the work you're doing, because we've talked about this before on the podcast and other conversations about women not being served the same in our research and those things, and especially when it comes to midlife and the changes that are happening. And so I love that you're bringing this to the forefront, talking about this, actually doing research, and bringing it down to a simple molecule that can do so much good. Now, from a practitioner standpoint, so I'm listening to the podcast, I'm learning about this important molecule. What kind of testing or assessment methods can I use to evaluate nitric oxide levels in my clients and patients?
Yeah, I love this. First of all, do your diligence as an observer and collect some of that, observational data that you get from doing an intake with your patient. So when their complaints are of fatigue, low sexual function, lack of mental energy and focus, lack of mental clarity, They're a midlife woman that's heard that they should lift heavy and eat more protein, but nothing in the gym is really shifting the needle for them at all. The weight around the belly is, starting to become problematic for that woman and the men too. Go back to your root cause foundation and decide that blood flow is important, and what stimulates blood flow but nitric oxide. So there's your first line assessment, is observation and asking the questions. The second line assessment is that Berkeley Life has nitric oxide test strips that are a quick salivary 10-second test that you can do in clinic. You can send these home with your patient, and they can monitor and track their capacity to produce nitric oxide all the time. It's super simple. It's a nice little hack. And the great thing about it is that people get a result. This is a simple Grice reaction. What we are testing actually is salivary nitrite, which we would then swallow as a one-step reductively removed from nitric oxide. And this begs talking about the enterosalivary pathway, because this is what Berkeley Life chooses to support with our dietary nitrates. So we are intaking a nitrate-rich food. Let's just call it a spinach salad, and we chew it. And as we chew, we're breaking apart the nitrates from the proteins in the spinach that it's bound to, and we're swallowing them. In the digestive system, we have the nitrates further reduced to nitrate to nitrite through the activity of your gastrointestinal system, the stomach acid. You have some microbes in your intestinal microbiome that are nitrate reducing, and they use their own nitric oxide reductases to help us break down nitrates, pull them into the bloodstream, and now we recircle and recycle nitrates 24 hours a day with our ingestion of dietary nitrates. We use about 20% of the nitrates that we intake on a daily basis to make nitric oxide for all the functions that NO does. And then we excrete about 60%. This is when it's a nitrate, it's got 3 nitrogens now, 3 oxygens. We are going to not be able to use it all in its half-life of 8 hours. So a lot of it gets excreted, and about 20% that we take in gets recycled, picked up by a transport protein called sialin. Sialin pulls nitrate into the salivary glands as a storage locker. And now all day long, as we salivate, we are salivating nitrates onto our oral microbiome, where there are at least 9 families of species of bacteria that help us break down nitrates to nitrite. So when we test our saliva, what we are testing is, I don't know if you can see this, but what we are testing is the amount of nitrate to nitrite reduction that the oral microbiome has done. We want these test strips to show up nice and bright pink. So a patient can come into your office, they can test, you can show them that they're low to depleted. And I will say that a lot of practitioners here might be low to depleted too, especially if you're that person burning the candle at all ends and getting your 2 workouts in a day and all that, you're probably depleting yourself. And then when they're low, you give them a dose of dietary nitrates right in the office. So we give them 2 capsules of our dietary nitrates, send them away with a test strip. 90 minutes later, that conversion process through the enterosalivary pathway should have happened within about 90 minutes. They take another test, and we see some progression on the test strip. So now we know their body has the capacity to break down nitrates and to convert them to nitrite and to nitric oxide and recycle them back to the salivary glands. But they might need some support to bridge that nutritional gap. Okay. These patterns with these test strips will fluctuate throughout the day. So I still, even though I enjoy my dietary nitrates and I supplement every day, I still wake up on the lower end. I'm not as depleted as I used to be. I still wake up 24 hours after dosing with some nitrate concentration still showing up. But now it's important that I regenerate myself. So I take another dose, but a lot of people will find that throughout the day, whether they're doing, excessive training for a marathon or a particularly stressful time, their levels will change. And so I encourage people to take these test strips home and use them as a little bit of a biohack, helps them decide when to dose. It also helps patients be a little bit more compliant with the other things we might teach them about, things like eating healthy leafy greens to get nitrates in the diet, things like actually chewing their food so that they're getting the most benefit out of the nutrients they take in. We promote breath work for nitric oxide production and avoidance of some compounds that might disrupt the oral microbiome. And so we build all that education in, and then we have these test strips that really sort of help people stay consistent with their supplementation, but also with their protocols in general.
Okay.
And it's quick and easy, 10 seconds.
Yeah, I love that simple test. I've done it many times, and on the low end, just recently when we were at a conference together, I tested, took the supplement, and then scored quite well 90 minutes later.
You did. You were so excited to show us too.
Hey, look at this, guys. This is amazing. So I like what you said about the lifestyle pieces, right? The breath work and looking at what foods are we eating and are we chewing our food properly? And then using these supplements to bridge that gap, right? Because most of us are overstressed, over exercising, not getting enough of the right nutrients in our diet regularly. And so we're lacking this. And then we throw a little age on there. I mean, we're all super, super amazing, even though we're in our midlife, but we still might need a little support. Can you give us just some of the foods that are actually really helpful in supporting nitric oxide pathways?
Yeah, when we think about nitrates and dietary nitrates, first of all, we need to distinguish that the nitrates that are in medications like nitroglycerin, those are known as organic nitrates. They have a different chemical composition. In the diet, in the average daily diet, we're actually consuming inorganic dietary nitrates. That includes mostly your leafy green vegetables, spinach, arugula, kale, beet greens, and it's especially concentrated in beetroot. So a lot of athletes out there may have used beetroot juice as a nitric oxide support before. And I'm here to say, unfortunately, the foods that we obtain those beetroot products from just aren't as concentrated as they used to be, and the number of nitrates varies batch to batch. And this is true of the spinach we buy and the arugula and the kale we buy. So we want to try to buy organic, and we want to try to eat as cleanly as possible. But those really dark leafy greens are a great source of nitrates. Some of my other favorite ones that are less thought of are things like celery. And so when you're choosing maybe a cured food, there's been a lot of controversy about nitrates being carcinogenic, but that's because a lot of that research was done on highly polluted water, highly polluted soil, and highly processed cured meats, things like, pepperonis and bacon and hot dogs and things like that. But in the healthier than choices on the market, in, some of those charcuterie boards, you're never going to avoid having, you're probably going to have a charcuterie board again in your life. Yeah. So try to make it a healthy one. Try to find one that is cured with celery salt. That is a rich source of nitrates, and that is helping with the curing process. So the other food that I'm a big fan of, but not everybody is rhubarb. Rhubarb is amazing for nitrate concentration, and it doesn't always have to be made sweetly. I pickle it. I make it into a fermented pickle. I also make like a little chutney to go on a tenderloin or something like that. It can be made into salad dressings. There's just all sorts of options beyond just a rhubarb pie.
I know strawberry rhubarb jam and strawberry rhubarb pie.
Right.
So thank you for clearing that up. I didn't know you could make it any other way. It's amazing. So I love this, that you're talking about the foods and the lifestyle, all those things, and that the Berkeley Life supplement. How does that just fit in? Does that, because we're going to monitor what we're doing with our protocols and then bring that in on a regular basis? What would you recommend for most practitioners starting out?
For practitioners starting out, I recommend you first of all, try the product for yourself, but also think of 5 to 10 patients you see right now that have a blood flow issue. It won't be hard when you really think about some of those signs and symptoms we talked about. So make a commitment that you're going to try it on yourself and 5 to 10 patients and have them try it for a month. Use the test strips and do the before and after. Test, take a dose, 90 minutes later, ensure that they are converting by seeing some change on the test strip. They may not get up to the bright pink target zone like I did. I did take my nitric oxide supplement earlier today, and I had a nice green salad at lunch. So I'm fully nitrate stored right now. So when they don't improve on that test strip, one thing that we offer is the prebiotic nitrate gum. We have a chewing gum that is a therapeutic, a functional gum. It contains prebiotic nitrates, so it's going to give you a little bit of that boost of nitric oxide, a little bit of an energy enhancement. I chew it on the way to yoga class or go take a hike or go skiing. I'm always using it as that performance aid. But really what it's meant to do is bathe the oral microbiome, especially those nitrate reducing species, with the food that they want. It helps restore and replenish their diversity and their populations. And now every dietary nitrate you eat from then on will be better converted as a result. So we encourage the use of the supplement, the test strips, and the gum to bridge that gap and make sure you're converting. But then we also encourage a lot of lifestyle effects. So breath work. And not just, breath work for the vagus nerve, although, by the way, the vagus nerve and nitric oxide have a sort of a chicken and egg relationship. And we can also get into that. But you need nitric oxide to calm the central nervous system and to help put us into that parasympathetic state. And at the same time, when the vagus nerve is tipped more sympathetic, it tends to stimulate nitric oxide production for either an immune response or a boost of blood flow or a hormone push, things like that. So we encourage breath work, things like the 4-7-8 breath, box breathing, but specifically through the nasal cavities, because when we breathe through the nasal cavities, we have nitric oxide synthase enzymes in the paranasal system, and the act of breathing actually activates those eNOS enzymes there too. So we can up our NO production simply by doing nostril breathing. And a lot of you practitioners might see this in your patients who are chronically sinus congested because they've been suffering with sinus congestion related to food allergies for many years. And so they tend to get habitual in their mouth breathing. So do athletes. Athletes tend to, especially high intensity athletes tend to do a lot of mouth breathing. So it's really important to sort of retrain the brain to breathe through the nasal cavity, because that is going to promote more nitric oxide production. We encourage your patients to get outside and get some natural vitamin D production. Vitamin D that we gain from sunlight is activating nitric oxide in the body at the same time. And then it's the avoidance of things that degrade the integrity of the oral microbiome, because we really do rely on these microbes to help us break down our nitrates. So that's avoiding smoking, vaping, excessive sugar, excessive alcohol. It's also avoiding really common antibiotic and antiseptic mouthwashes, rinses, and practices. And so I haven't used a fluoride toothpaste in many, many years. I've used a very natural toothpaste ever since. But when I learned about this degradation of the oral microbiome, now I'm very careful about what I use in my mouth. So even though we think oil pulling as a wonderful tradition that's really detoxifying and can help whiten the teeth, but it has an antimicrobial effect, especially if you're using coconut oil with it. So maybe it's not a daily habit. Maybe it's used therapeutically, as it probably was in ancient Ayurveda. It's avoiding excessive use of antimicrobial essential oils in the mouth, but then especially avoiding those chlorhexidine products, the kind of commercial mouthwashes that are supposed to give you a minty fresh flavor, but they just absolutely destroy the quality and the integrity of the oral microbiome. So we want people to be avoiding that. And then anything we can do for stress reduction, because there is that calming of the nervous system that nitric oxide helps promote. So if we can reduce the stressors in life, we can make it easier to adapt to the stress response. So we have to work on stress mitigation as well too, as practitioners, but also as humans on this planet.
Brilliant. Those are amazing tips. And I love that you're bringing in all of that information about the oral microbiome and how some of our daily habits are things that people have been doing regularly, especially our clients and patients, that can be affecting the oral microbiome and thus affecting their nitric oxide levels. Amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, one of our medical advisory board members is Dr. Geraldo Magarinos. He is a dentist, but he's also a naturopathic physician. And he is a big proponent of, we need the mechanical cleansing of the teeth, but you can do it with just water. So he's a big proponent of proper brushing technique and flossing and water picks, but maybe we don't actually need the chemical elements, if you will, to keep our mouths clean, and at the same time we can protect the oral microbiome. So and this is again why I think I'm on a world mission to make everybody chew their food more because it starts, as I used to teach in class, the sight, the smell, the anticipation of food is what starts the digestive cascade, but the mechanical action of chewing does as well too. And if we have a hope of assimilating our nitrates, we have to make sure we're chewing our food first so we can turn on all those chemical and mechanical functions in the digestive system to get the most benefit out of not just the nitrates, but all the nutrients we eat. So think about it tonight. Chew your salad a little bit longer and see if you get a little bit better.
Brilliant. I
boost
like
from
that.
it.
I was just going to ask you, what's a practical takeaway that you can apply to help women and female clients in perimenopause and menopause improve their nitric oxide levels? And chewing their food is something I recommend all the time, and now I can say it does that too.
The other thing I would suggest, and I suggest this to especially women all the time, is that we need to start our day with some kind of ritual. And my ritual builds nitric oxide. So I wake, I grab a glass of water, and I go outside. Now, I live in Oregon. It is not always warm in the morning, but I go outside and I put my bare feet in the grass and I put my face to the sun. If there is no sun or if it's raining, I still allow myself to get a little wet from the rain, but maybe not drenched. And I do some breath work right there. I tend to just do a cycle of 3, 4, 7, 8 breaths. And if there's snow on the ground, I do it. If there's, a warm, sunny day, what a bonus. I might stay out there longer. But I think we need, whatever your ritual is, it should involve waking to the day, to the outdoors, to natural sunlight, and to some breath work. I think that's just, and pure water. I think that's the easiest things we can all do to boost our nitric oxide production.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been a great discussion so far, and I want to make sure we get to our audience question and answer. So thanks to everybody who's been posting questions. We'll get to as many as we can. And if you happen to be watching this as a replay, feel free to post your questions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a live stream. All right, here's our first question. Do you think using mouth tape during sleep helps with nitric oxide within the body while sleeping?
Absolutely, it does. And, I'm a fan of it. I can't say, like, I had to reclaim my own nasal breathing patterns after suffering from mold toxicity and being chronically congested for many years and having upper respiratory stuff that I have now cleared from my life because I did all the mitigation and all that. But the mouth breathing, and I've also been a competitive athlete most of my life. So I've been that, person who kind of huffs and puffs out there. It's a difficult habit to break. So I think any kind of tool like that, like mouth tape, can help us retrain the brain to breathe as we are supposed to. Now, we're all going to get a chance to sit around a table with friends and eat too quickly and not chew our food and breathe through our mouth. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, when you can, when you're out on a jog, when you're in yoga, when you are, sitting on the couch, trying to be mindful about that. And I think things like when we're sleeping, we can't be mindful. So things like mouth tape are a great tool.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right, next one. Here we go. How can nitric oxide levels be a contributor to hormonal issues like PMS, endometriosis, and other issues?
Yeah, this gets a little deeper into I said earlier that nitric oxide can be both oxidative and anti-inflammatory. And how can that be? Well, it is a redox molecule.
Okay.
And depending on the surrounding environment and depending on the body's perceived need for an anti-inflammatory effect, we can see excessive elevations in nitric oxide. So from that hormonal standpoint, and with PCOS and endometriosis, we can expect that there's some inflammation going on. So we might expect that there's some localized NO excess in the body. The great news is you don't have to shy away from the dietary nitrates and the attempt to sustain optimal levels at all times in the bloodstream just because there is an inflammatory condition going on. I've actually found quite a bit of research, a lot of it's animal research, but research showing that there is great crosstalk between both the endogenous production of nitric oxide and the dietary nitrate recycling pathway that I mentioned earlier. And that by supporting dietary nitrate pathway, you can actually attenuate the inflammation and calm down the excessive NO being produced when there's an endometrial flare or when there is an excessive amount of testosterone, because with PCOS, there's so many other things going on. We can't really make nitric oxide the cause, but we know there's inflammation, and we know that there's likely inducible nitric oxide synthase, that's a different enzyme, when there's a need to control inflammation. And I think we're all here aware that inflammation is not necessarily a bad thing. It's only a bad thing when it's left chronic and when it's left unmitigated and when it creates damage. So the idea being to employ the tools and the tips and the support to keep those sustainable levels of dietary nitrate so that the body isn't having to work so hard to fight the inflammation. There is already something anti-inflammatory present. And when we have enough stores on the shelf, so to speak, there's less need to flip the switch on the emergency supply. So that's the key there, is to try to find that balance. And this is where the test strips come in. If that person with endometriosis used a test strip and they were testing very high on every single test I gave them 2 to 3 times a day over a week, I might suspect that they're in an excessive NO production phase right now, and I don't need to augment that other than with breath work and avoidance of the things I talked about earlier. But quite honestly, clinically, and I work with a lot of autoimmune patients, I've never seen that. I've never seen anybody test very high repeatedly because they have too much nitric oxide. What I'd be looking for at that point in time are other inflammatory biomarkers on a blood chemistry test. So I'd be looking for C-reactive protein, homocysteine elevations, TNF-alpha, interleukin-6. I'd be looking for those kinds of blood markers to help me identify if it's possible they have an excess of NO. That's not something that most of us in functional medicine are going to be able to test on the regular. That's a pretty in-depth laboratory test to test your gas levels.
All right. Thank you on that. That's amazing. We have another question here. Could you discuss the interplay between nitric oxide signaling and mitochondrial efficiency, and how supporting both systems together can enhance overall energy and resilience during hormonal transition? What a beautiful question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that nitric oxide signals is mitochondrial biogenesis. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's the regeneration of mitochondria that have sort of worn out their life cycle. They still have some functional parts, but they also are not contributing as efficiently as they were to hormone control and to energy production. So what the body does is takes 2 less than highly functional mitochondria and is triggered by nitric oxide to initiate the mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new healthy mitochondria by taking 2 mitochondria that are fused together. The unhealthy parts or the dysfunctional parts are recycled as waste products, and the mitochondria then goes on to have a more efficient electron transport chain and can kick out ATP at a more efficient rate. So that's what we know mechanistically about it. And what I see clinically is that this shows up really quickly in people who start to take nitric oxide and sort of retrain the cells and the mitochondria to perform this efficiency piece. Remember that you're also bringing more oxygen to the mitochondria because you have improved blood flow. One of the things we have in our formula to augment that is a methylated vitamin B12 in a quantity that is known to help support red blood cell delivery of oxygen to the mitochondria. So we've put that into the formula, knowing that that's a big piece of the energy flow. I talked to a practitioner yesterday who said it was really interesting. She started taking the nitric oxide foundation for 3 days. And for the first 3 days, she actually felt like a decrease in energy. And she wasn't sure where that was coming from. And she wasn't expecting that. Well, she pushed through that And 4 days later, so now we're 7 days into taking 2 capsules a day, she said, now I have more energy than ever before. And, just the best I could theorize for her is that her body needed time to recalibrate to this new level of a stored energy form in the form of circulating nitrates and nitrites that could be turned into nitric oxide that could then stimulate the mitochondrial function. So I think for her, she just had to push through that recalibration phase. And she's going to report back to me on how it goes with those 5 to 10 patients I challenged her on, because I think we have to remember each one of us is biochemically unique, and no two reactions are going to be exactly the same. But I will say that across the board, I usually see people feel increased energy in 3 to 7 days, and they're like, "Gosh, I'm just getting out of bed, and I don't even think about it. I was dragging my feet. Now I'm like getting more done in my day." And so those are the kind of clinical testimonials I look for on top of the mechanistic piece we know about NO stimulating mitochondrial efficiency.
Thank you. And I like that you brought up recalibration. So bringing this in might take a little recalibrating. And when we're talking about midlife women, that's a recalibration altogether, right? Everything is shifting. So this whole
Yeah.
phase is recalibrating. And so to have this tool is really powerful. Okay, we have one last question here. How does nitric oxide modulation impact cognitive and mood-related symptoms that arise during perimenopause? And are there measurable correlations that we can monitor?
I'm so glad you asked this, because yes, there are. And this is such an exciting piece in the science right now, too. I actually follow a researcher out of Exeter University in England, and she and her team are studying specifically the role of nitrate reducing bacterial species in the oral microbiome as it relates to cognitive function and prevention of cognitive decline, especially in individuals with the APO4E. I can never say it right.
Yeah.
The gene, the Alzheimer's gene. It's really exciting research. But let's bring it back down to that, sort of what we know and where the research has taken us, how it got us there. We know that increased blood flow is not just happening in individual parts of the body. When we boost vasodilation, that is happening to all the vasculature in the body, and that includes your cerebral vasculature. So now we're getting better blood flow to the brain. We're getting better oxygen delivery to the brain, better energy for brain function. We are getting that retroneurotransmitter effect on neurotransmitter production. So we are better able to regulate our serotonin, GABA, dopamine, acetylcholine, which is your, not only for inflammation, but sort of your learning and cognitive focus neurotransmitters. We know nitric oxide can contribute to those pathways working in a more balanced, optimal way. And then, like I said, we also know now that not only the gut microbiome, the gut-brain axis, but let's call it the gut-oral. I pointed the gut.
Yeah.
The brain-oral gut axis. We know that those microbes are contributing to cognitive function, and there is some exciting research going on in this regard. So I'm really excited to see what comes out, and especially for the prevention of cognitive decline. One of the things that we are planning to do in our menopause study coming up is there will be quality of life surveys, and one of them is specifically a cognitive health quality of life survey. So we're going to start to track some of that data around what women perceive as an estrogen loss related decline in cognitive function. I got brain fog, and I can't remember my sentences, and I forgot my kids' names the other day. All those things. Well, maybe it's estrogen related, because estrogen is dropping nitric oxide production as well. And on that, I'm just going to throw out too that not only are we doing a clinical trial next year, but in about a month, on December 8th, check out a webinar from Berkeley Life. We're going to introduce to you a new first of its kind, one of its kind product aimed at women in the perimenopause and menopause years. It's going to be addressing those horrible vasomotor signs like hot flashes and night sweats, anxiety, irritability, sleep issues. And we hope to expand upon what we already know nitric oxide does. And we have a new formula coming out that's going to be over the top. I've already snuck it to a few of my patients, and I'm seeing some dramatic results already, and I'm excited.
Oh, that's really exciting. Cathy, this has been such a great discussion. I'm so grateful for all the work you are doing. This is really powerful. Where can people find out more about Berkeley Life and how to work with your products or be set up as a practitioner with your company?
Yeah, we welcome healthcare providers. We just ask you to, say what your credential is, but we'd love to set you up with an account. You can find us at www.berkeleylife.com. It's with 3 E's, so I think it's on the screen here, Berkeley life.com. I had to think about the rest of the spelling. We have an Instagram channel, a YouTube channel. I think we're soon to be on TikTok, so we're going to be enjoying sharing that platform with you as well too. We'd like to offer anybody reviewing this today live or even after the fact, we want to offer you a 20% off discount to try our products. If you are a practitioner, we can get you a wholesale account set up. So you can just check us out at berkeleylife.com, and then when you're talking to a sales executive or placing an order online, just put in the code HICS20 and you'll get 20% off. And we have some packages, to get you started. If you have any questions of me, reach out to me at info@berkeleylife.com. I'm pretty quick on the turnaround to questions, but we're also quite busy now getting ready for a product launch. So pardon me if it takes me a couple days to get back to you, but I'm happy to take your questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cathy. This has been such a fun and very informative and educated conversation today. I'm excited to get more of your supplement in my hands and in the hands of my clients. And I look forward to this new product launch. So
Thank you
thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Laney. It's been my pleasure. I'm just excited to meet you all.
If you're listening to this podcast, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. And be sure to join us live in 2 weeks for another episode.